curious, like before we dive into some Axie strategy here, I want to like mini interview. I want to hear like the Indes story. Like how did you get into Axie? How did you become? I mean, how many times have you been number? Where season 17 is done. How many times have you been number one at the end of the season?
So season 5, 10, and 16, I came first, I believe, and then about 5 of the times I've been top 3.
Wow. Okay. So you've cleaned up a little bit of AXS, some other prizes along the way. So what was your
Yeah,
very
not bad.
start in Axie? Were you already into crypto? I'm so curious. Like I'm 31, so we're almost like different generations. I'm so curious to hear about like your kind of lens on crypto, like how you first heard about it, and then how you applied that to Axie, and if you like you thought it was sus at the beginning, like if you kind of always believed in it. Like give me the lowdown, man. I'm so curious.
So in all honesty, I knew of crypto, of course, being younger, but I'd never really done anything within it. But I knew Chief through Clash Royale. I met him when I was probably 12
Oh, okay.
over there. And so he'd always been telling me about Axie, even from before there was a game. Just told me, internet monsters, you can make money with them, yada, yada, yada. I didn't really pay attention to it because I had school. I had exams coming up in the sort of June of last year. But of course, then COVID happened. My exams were cancelled, just enough predicted grades. So I was able to have a lot more free time because we were on lockdown. I had, nothing else to do. So I messaged Chief. He got me set up on an account, which at the time was essentially a scholarship account. He took 20% of whatever I earned, just let me test the game out for a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And from the start, I enjoyed playing, managed to get up into the top 20, which at the time, there was probably only about 500 people. So it's not as much of a feat as it is now. But
Still.
yeah, it sparked what I enjoy with the game, which is playing it. That was my first thing. It wasn't really about the crypto aspect at the time. SLP earnings. SLP was probably like a tenth of a cent or something at the time. It was always just about playing the game. There was quite a few transferable skills from Clash Royale in the sort of macro. The thinking behind it is fairly similar. But of course, in Clash Royale, there's a lot of micro skill, and that was mainly the reason why I stopped playing in a semi-professional capacity over there. Was that you had to play a good hour and a half, 2 hours a day, just to make sure you had your placements and everything ready so that you could at least compete in the tournament.
Yeah.
Before I stopped Clash Royale, I moved over into coaching for a year or so. So that's helped in Axie, of course, just being able to be quite evaluative and looking over at your own gameplay has helped me improve and keep up with the metas as it's developed over the past year or so in Axie.
Interesting. Wow. So yeah, I've played a little bit of Clash Royale. I was doing like full-time Dota stuff when Clash Royale started popping off. So I kind of knew about it. I played it on the side a little. It's a really interesting game. I think of it as a rather unique concept for a mobile game in terms of like even the dimensions and how it fits the screen, and it's like the perfect digestible little gameplay. It is kind of competitive, but it didn't keep me coming back the same way Axie has. Like I'm still honeymooning with Axie, but I feel like every person I talk to, I get a little bit more FOMO about whatever it is their thing is, right? Every person has their own, whether they're a breeder or a battler or a collector or a scholarship manager or a streamer or a YouTuber. Like everybody has their own lens, and whatever they're doing, I walk away with this sense of FOMO, like, shit, I really got to set up that aqua farm. I've been thinking about it, but I got to just start breeding. And then same with arenas, like end of season coming up, I'm like, okay, I got to actually grind a little bit. I haven't played any arenas this season. I feel like I'm constantly stuck in this FOMO state of Axie where I wish I had done more, and I just want to do more the more I engage with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, that was a large part of playing Clash Royale at the start. Was just all my mates played it. It was like the most played game at the school.
Hmm.
So that's just what I did. I definitely agree with you on that. That actually has that sort of element to it that you could just carry on coming back. Like I did carry on coming back. I didn't have any friends at the time that played like in real life. I only knew Chief through in the Axie community initially, and I would just carry on playing because I enjoyed it. As Gio always goes on about with the stickiness
Mm-hmm.
of the game. I definitely feel that through the gameplay.
Yeah. So do you do breeding or any of that stuff? Like, do you have any land, or are you hyped for land gameplay, or are you just PvP through and through?
Yeah, so I have acquired land over time. Right now, I've got 13 connected Arctic plots and a little
Oh
square
shit.
near the Mystic plot, and then I have a corner Mystic. The spot closest to the Genesis that you can get. It's on a little corner river thing.
Ah,
A lot of
okay.
it I picked up earlier on. I'd always sort of bred and flipped. That was my main thing. Was I was flipping a lot because at the time, not many people had a good understanding of the PvP. There wasn't much of a development in the meta at all. There were lots of
Mm,
cards that were sort of unexplored. So you were always able to pick up Axies that were half decent. They weren't going to be the top Axies, but they were a lot better than people perceived them to be. And I made a lot of profit from that. But I never really looked at invest in land until the uni airdrop last year, because that was the first time I ever had over, I got 3 ETH from that because I sold really early because I was new, but that was the first time I'd ever
mhm.
had that much, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I just put it into these 6 land plats which I got off an OG.
Dang.
um, and since then, I just sort of grew around that. I didn't really know what else to do whenever I made profits on things. Anything over an ETH sort of made me,
Yeah.
just that's so much money. I don't know what to do with it. So I just put it back into Axie, whether it was items or land.
Damn, dude.
Um,
Talk about FOMO though. Like I have 2 Arctic plots that are connected, and I thought I'm hot shit because one of them's like on the corner of a resource node, and I'm like right there. This is the biggest like NFT investment I've ever made. 13. Oh god, that just makes me want to save for another Arctic plot, man. God damn. It
oh,
never
God.
stops. That feeling of wanting more. But I guess that's
Yeah,
economy. I'll do that to you. I'm curious.
for
Have you ever
sure.
thought about like as somebody who like obviously people respect your voice as like a leader in the meta. You know, people look at what you're doing. They look at your axes. You certainly have some influence. Is that weird as a content creator potentially? Like, do you ever feel like you come up with a strat, but then you don't want to reveal it because people can see it, or vice versa? Like if you discover some sick new bug combination, do you consider breeding a bunch of bugs with that combination before you make the video because you know people are going to want to try to copy what you're doing? Like have you ever thought about just that weird balance of blockchain gaming being so much more transparent than a lot of other games? It's I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky balance. In the past, a lot of the reason why I was able to try out new things was that people, breeders, would reach out to me with this build, ask me if it was any good, and if I wanted to try it, I could try it for free. Of course, with the caveat being that I'm going to be at the top of the leaderboards. People can see the teams I'm using, and that would boost their sales. So I was always aware that
Yeah.
could happen, and that there is some level of influence just even from being on the leaderboard. It
Yeah.
might not be a tournament or anything like that. But yeah, that's something I have encountered, especially doing videos with Elijah, because I don't personally have a YouTube channel. Just I do content here and there with
Mhm.
other people. And after Elijah makes a video on something, I mean, people have told me, and I've seen it myself, that the market goes up for that thing. Even if it's marketed as a cheap starter team, it will go up 50% off of the bat. So it is a tricky balance. I've had my own breeding lines in the past, but I don't often breed before then do a video with the hopes that the sales are going to go up. Like for me, if the build is good enough to breed and people are going to want it regardless of whether it's Indes approved or something like that, I will breed the build.
Mhm.
And on the point of not wanting to show new strategies, for me, I don't mind people knowing what I'm playing. I don't mind other people seeing what I'm playing, because I have sort of a confidence that I know how to play this build as well as I can, and
Mm.
to a good level. And if somebody else tries it, perhaps they might not be able to have as much success. And even in the past, people like Ouchie, he's a good friend of mine, he will say himself he's not the best PvP player. He plays quite casually, and he'll always try and have the same builds as I have or AK has. And you'll see the difference. And I think for me it helps because you've got that crowd of people that say Axie, or a lot of it's just pay to win. Buy the best Axies and you'll do really well.
Mhm.
And for me, it's sort of a way of proving that there is this skill disparity when you've got 2 people using very similar teams and they're placing differently in arena, or they've got varying win rates, anything like that. So I think in that respect, I quite enjoy other people having access to the same builds that
Mm.
I do.
Mhm. Yeah. And one of the other things, like along those lines, that multiple people have suggested to me that I've been putting a lot of thought into recently is if we have some sort of an Axie like league in the future, or some sort of circuit where there's these points and there's some kind of a major big tournament that it all leads up to. Some kind of drafting mode, like competitors mode or something, might make some sense of like limiting the pool of Axies. So people with like 150 Axies or something that are all battle ready can't just swap out for these little nuances to min max against opponents. But it's also a cool layer of strategy where, but you know, before you start your series, you each bring, let's say, 12 Axies to the table. Maybe you lock one each, and then you go back and forth and ban two, maybe three, something like that. So you still have a couple of different comps you can run. It adds like all these layers of, you're assuming that your opponent can see all the combos within your Axies that you see, you know, like it's
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if those numbers are exactly the way to calibrate it. I'm sort of shooting from the hip, but something conceptually sort of like that, I think, could be neat for the like esports side of Axie.
Yeah, I definitely think a pick ban would be a good system to implement. The difficulty is always just how many Axies are you going to include.
Yeah.
And for me, when I play tournaments, I tend to have a pool of 15 to 20 Axies. It depends how hyper specific I've got. Like some tanks, at one point I had 8 different types of tank, and they were all just had like one very slight difference, and they were optimized for a different team. You wouldn't, with a sort of a pick ban system, let's say assume it's 12 Axies, you're probably looking at only 2, maybe 3 tanks. And it would bring a lot of strategy into it, thinking, well, how many just solid teams do I bring in, and how many hyper specific counter Axies do I have? Like even the Axies for my profile picture, I call Sushi Chef. It's just there to hard counter Aquas and other Axies that are all melee. Things like that. Would you be able to afford to bring that on? Would there be a viable team, or does it only fit in this specific team composition? And for me, there's only 1 or 2 compositions I can run that in. Can I afford to put that in with my other 12 Axies? So I definitely think a constraint like that would sort of allow for another element of skill that comes into it more from like a Clash Royale side. For me, the deck picking, that was massive. For like, you had analysts, coaches, everything like that were built just to try and get your players the best possible matchup. And in Axie, that's something that's less explored, because even players that have, you know, more Axies, they tend to only have 1 or 2 builds that they really know how to play and stick to in tournaments. And we don't see much of a shift from that unless it's a look to counter. But even then, players go for, you know, very specific counters that they might not be used to playing, and they make mistakes, and then they're not as effective. There aren't many players that have specific builds that counter another popular build in case it comes up. So I think some sort of formalization, at least with a 12 Axie pool, or whatever the number is, that would at least help players to start thinking in that manner. You know, I've got to have this many Axies, I want to counter these teams. And I think it would help see a lot of a development in the esports. Even if it is, like, regardless of what the prize pool is, I think people would be interested in playing, and it would just mature it a bit more, have a bit of a esports element to it.
It adds another layer of strategy for sure. And I do think that there is sometimes some value. I mean, for me, I come from the Dota space, so that's where I draw a lot of my parallels. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to have the arena still be a competitive thing with seasons that is sort of like an all-pick game mode, if you will, sort of like ranked Dota or ranked League of Legends. It's not the same thing that you play when it's a 5v5 team where it's captain's mode or whatever, where you're actually picking and banning and really playing along the meta and your team style and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's almost what adds an extra layer of hype to the professional play compared to like the public matchmaking play. And having some separation there is I don't think that's like objectively bad or anything like that. And you could maybe even argue that it's kind of objectively good. But yeah, we'll see. It's an exciting time for Axie. And now it looks like we're entering a bear market for crypto. So, you know, that this is another good test. Like, I think it's a good time to be doing stuff like Axie and DeFi and various other, like, doing stuff with blockchain rather than just staring at the price and being upset that your portfolio doesn't look good. Because regardless of what ETH is worth, my Axies are grinding, man. I'm working on my battle strategies. I'm breeding. I'm thinking about land gameplay, you know? So, yeah. Anyway, all right. Should we dive into some arenas, dude? Is that